this is a terrible story. This is a really awful story. Unfortunately, there are a lot of really awful stories in the Bible. Stories where people get hurt. Stories where people and even God do things that we can't quite parse out. And in this one, a child's life is threatened by their parent, no less. So here I am holding this awful story this week, and I'm looking for where can there be good news. And at the same time, the actual news this week is also kind of awful. Feels like it's always kind of awful. And I realized that one of the things that makes this story a little bit more readable is that when I remind myself that we do know the ending of the story, we know the intervention. There is good news in the intervention. And there is some good news also in the knowledge that this whole interaction happens in the context of a covenant relationship between the divine and the person that the divine has chosen, Abraham and God. This whole generations long relationship between God and a particular tribe of people, and arguably even with us as the descendants in faith, that whole covenant relationship began with one person, Abraham, and his partner Sarah. Seemingly at random, God chose Abraham kind of like there's no reason given about Abraham, but God proceeded to invest relational energy into that person, and also by extension into Sarah and Hagar and their children and all of the people who would then be descended from Abraham. But here in this story, we're right at the beginning. We're beginning that generations long journey. And God and Abraham are exploring what does it mean to be in a covenantal relationship? What are the limits? What are the boundaries? What can be asked of each other? What will be provided? How are we present to each other? One of the ways that I see Abraham showing up in relationship to God is in his responses. So we hear this thing repeated a couple of times. When God calls Abraham, Abraham answers, "Here," or in lots of translations, "Here I am, Lord." Like we have this song in our hymnal, "Here I am, Lord." And in the CEB, it says, "I'm here," which feels a little bit like not quite right, to me at least, because it's not like God doesn't know where Abraham is and Abraham's like, "Over here, you can find me over here." It's not like a classroom where teacher's calling out, "Lene, here." Like this is really about there. We don't have a word like this in English. Abraham is responding with the Hebrew word hineni, which is like saying, not just here, but I'm ready. I'm with you. My friend Julie was talking this week about overhearing her son playing video games. He plays online with his friends, and like he's sitting in the room and they're all wherever and they are. And she'll overhear her son say something like, "Okay, lock in." Or like, "I'm locked in." And that reminded me of the sort of the sense of what this means is like, I am ready for whatever you are going to ask. I'm ready for what the thing that is going to happen. Complete focus, complete attention on this other person. We're going to get a series of stories this fall, which we hear this kind of a response, this very relational response, both with God, a sort of readiness or orientation completely toward, and also in human relationships. Next week or the week after, I should be keeping track, but we hear this between Samuel and Eli. Samuel says this to his mentor, Eli. And Abraham responds not only to God in this way, but also to his son, to his child. And I'm a bit in awe of Abraham that he can so completely and utterly be present to God in this awful thing that he's being asked to do, this terrible test. A test that requires him to believe either that God actually wants him to sacrifice his child, and he's willing to do it, or that God has some kind of a workaround that will come to pass. And in that context, he's completely present to God, and he's also completely present to his child. And neither of them know that this is a test. Neither of them know the ending of this story. But Abraham can equally turn to his child, who's becoming skeptical, and says to him in the same way, Hineni, I'm here for you. I'm completely locked in. Honestly, as a parent, I'm a little bit jealous. I do not often have that kind of presence and like focus on my own children. And when I can do that, like that's great. But somehow Abraham is to carry these two in with each other, and there is also some good news in that. I think I would probably go crazy to have to constantly hold both of those realities. Here's the child, this child of my old age, the one that was promised, the beloved one. You can hear that in the text, that like emphasis on how beloved and singular this child is, gazing with innocent and questioning eyes. And here's Abraham carrying the sacrificial knife that God has called him to wield. And somehow he can carry those both together. Maybe because of the depth of the relationship that he has in both cases, because of his deep trust in God's faithfulness. In the late 70s, Leonard Cohen wrote a song about this story. He writes it from the perspective of Isaac. It's called The Song of Isaac. The innocent son who doesn't see the faithfulness of God or of his father. He's just a scared and confused child. And there are a few lines that I can't stop thinking about from that. I will probably cry. He sings, you who build the altars now to sacrifice these children, you must not do it anymore. Cohen wrote this song about the Vietnam War, about the seeming expendability of the nation's youth. But what I couldn't stop thinking about was all the children in schools, in churches, college campuses, and war zones who are apparently expendable. My daughter Naomi was 6 when the shooting happened in a school in Connecticut and at Sandy Hook. And she was the same age as those children. And now she's a college student on a college campus. And all of us who are parents or who have been students, I know we feel that deeply. And so I was feeling those words, you must not do it anymore. And by now we've all heard, and we've been talking about already, the news about Charlie Kirk. He was a right-wing organizer. He was a guns rights activist and advocate, and he was shot to death at the event he was speaking at. And only weeks before, he was quoted as saying that it's acceptable to expect deaths as the price to pay for the freedom to bear arms. The ways that we are willing to sacrifice children, Cohen reminds us in this song, it's not at the call of the divine. Abraham at least had a direct connection with God who was asking him to do this test. Cohen says in his song, it's a scheme for power, for dominance, for some kind of misplaced understanding of glory, of freedom. And I've been feeling really emotional this week. Like, I almost started crying in yoga. about Kirk's death, about the views that he espoused, about the fact that ultimately his desire for violence led to his own downfall. And that killing him, there will be no change. There will be just a deepening of that divide. Johnny Rashid wrote about it in a way that I found helpful. Johnny's a pastor in Pennsylvania, and he's been part of the leadership of Mennonite Action. That's how I met him. And he writes really thoughtfully about all kinds of issues of justice and nonviolence. And I follow him on Substack. You could too. He wrote this. Despite feeling complicated about Kirk's death, I condemn the assassin's actions and disagree with their political efficacy. There's nothing to celebrate. It is sad. It is a sad and dark day, to be sure. The world is not safer because Charlie Kirk is dead. But the fact remains that Kirk's life and legacy is one that made it more violent and more dangerous. Kirk lived by the sword and he died by it. And he didn't only arm himself, he proclaimed that casualties of gun violence are better off dead as long as we keep the right to wield our guns. And he goes on. Johnny Rashid does. I elect to be nonviolent because I follow Jesus Christ, who succumbed to the state's death. I am moved to be anti-violent because Jesus lived and died for the oppressed. Jesus modeled his life as a selfless one, uplifting the oppressed. Now, Jesus isn't in the story of Abraham and Isaac, although plenty of Christian readers do understand it as a sort of foretaste of the Christ story. But like we have the benefit as readers of the context that God is enacting a test, that God will intervene, that there will be a ram to sacrifice, we also have the benefit of that whole arc of the scriptural story. As Christians, we can read this knowing that God's desire for human beings is deep relationship. Relationship with God, relationship with our neighbor. And in fact, that has been my meditation repetition in yoga and in other places where I want to ground myself. I say my breath prayer is, I love God, I love my neighbor. I love God, I love my neighbor. The story of Abraham and Isaac's descendants, including us, if we read that in the way that we are all descendants of Abraham, it will culminate in the person of Jesus. And through Jesus, spread and bless the whole world. So my good news, where I can find it here, arising from this story, is that I continue to listen for God's voice and respond meaningfully and seriously. Here, I am locked in. I am here for you. And I will equally listen to the voice of the world and the world's children and respond in equal measure. Here, I am here for you. Because ultimately, I believe they are the same. Thanks be to God.